Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
You know what really sucks? Clocking out at your usual time, but you can't go home yet. Inclement weather can make that happen. Violent criminals, too, if you're unlucky. But have you ever heard of a pack of dogs holding people hostage at work? Welcome back to Dead and Roasted, my friends. I'm Darkness Prevails, back with some more spooky work-related bangers. Today's allegedly true stories from viewers like you feature disturbing dog packs, Smoky Mountain rules, and the forest that calls you home. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. Also, quick question. If we had our own Dead and Roasted coffee, would you buy it? What sort of flavor notes should it have? And what roast should it be? The Night the Dogs Came. From Dennis. This was 1983, somewhere in Oklahoma. I was 19 years old, working the evening shift at a McDonald's on the east side of town. I'd been there for about 8 months at the time. Back then, it was decent money for a kid right out of high school. Don't fact check me, but I think it was about $3.35 an hour, plus whatever food I could sneak. The manager, who I'll refer to as Carl, was pretty cool about that, as long as we didn't go crazy with it. I am telling this story now because my grandson recently asked me about the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I've had plenty of jobs since then. Warehouse, postal service, even ran my own landscaping business for a while. But nothing tops what happened that September night at McDonald's. Nothing even comes close. It was a Tuesday, which meant it would be slow after about 8 p.m. By 10:30 p.m., we'd maybe had 5 customers in 2 hours. The dining room was empty, just us 4 closers, me on register and Tammy on the drive-thru, Miguel in the kitchen, and Carl doing his manager duties, which mostly meant counting down the safe and complaining about corporate. We were supposed to close at 11, but Carl always locked the doors at 10:45 if it was dead. He had just turned the lock, too, when Tammy said, "What in the world?" She was looking out the drive-thru window. We all went over to see. There were dogs everywhere, maybe 20, 25 of them, all different breeds and sizes. German Shepherds, Mutts, a couple of Dobermans, some little terrier-looking things. They were sitting in the parking lot, facing the building. They weren't moving around or sniffing or playing or any other normal dog stuff. They were sitting there, just sitting there, and watching us. "That's weird as heck," Miguel said. Carl, being Carl, immediately went into manager mode. "They're blocking the drive-thru. I'll go run them off." "Maybe we should call animal control instead," Tammy suggested. "For what? Stray dogs? They'll leave as soon as I walk outside, especially if I start chasing them." Carl grabbed the push broom we used for the dining room. "Miguel, come with me." "No way, man." "That's funny, 'cause I wasn't asking." Carl was basically at the door already, and Miguel wasn't moving. Carl went outside the side entrance, and we watched through the windows. He took maybe 3 steps into the parking lot before the dogs reacted. You'd think they might bark, but I remember them not doing that at all, very clearly. They didn't make a sound. They stood all at once and turned to face him. Carl stopped, now holding out the broom like a weapon. "Go on, get!" he shouted. One of the German Shepherds moved first. It didn't run. It walked towards him with its head low. Then another dog followed suit, then another. Carl backed up a step, and when he did, they rushed him like sharks sensing blood. I had never seen Carl move like that. He ran, dropping the broom and sprinting for the door. One of the medium-sized mutts got him right above the ankle, tore through his jeans. I heard Carl scream then, and he kicked off the dog and dove through the door. Miguel slammed it shut behind him. Carl's leg was bleeding pretty bad. Not hospital bad, but bad enough. Tammy got the first aid kit while Carl sat on the floor, pressing napkins against his bite. "Crap," he kept saying. "What the heck, man? Crap." The dogs had gone back to their original positions, sitting there and watching us inside the building. There were some standing up at the windows, standing on their hind legs and watching through the glass. "I'm calling the cops," Carl said. The phone was not working. It wasn't broken. There was a dial tone, but every number Carl tried rang and rang. 911, the non-emergency line, even the McDonald's hotline, nothing connected. "Try the payphone," Tammy said. Miguel went to check, and he came back shaking his head. "Same thing, it just rings." We were stuck. The dogs had the building completely surrounded now. Every exit, every window, just sitting there and staring. Their eyes caught the light from inside and they glowed. That was an image that would be burned into my mind forever. So creepy. "Man, this is really messed up," Miguel said. "Like supernatural messed up." "It's just dogs," Carl said. We ended up sitting in the dining room away from the windows. Carl's leg had stopped bleeding, but he was limping. We'd tried the phones probably 10 more times, but nothing. "My uncle had something weird happen with a dog once," Tammy said. We were all feeling that need to talk that comes when you're scared and when you're waiting. He had this beagle that started acting strange once. It would stand in the backyard and bark right at the sky. It wouldn't bark at birds or planes, just straight up in the air. Really weird, huh? It did that for weeks, until one day it jumped the fence, and they never saw it again. That's not that weird," Miguel said. "Dogs run away." "Yeah, but the next week," Tammy continued, 3 more dogs in the neighborhood did the same thing, stood in their yards and barked at the sky, then ran off for good." We were quiet for a minute. I could hear the ice machine cycling in the kitchen. The start of it startled me for a moment. I looked at the entrance through the glass doors. The dogs were still there. They hadn't moved an inch. "My turn," Miguel said. "My grandpa, back in Mexico, he had this basset hound. Real sickly thing, always had something wrong with it. Eye infections or mange, you name it. But the weirdest thing was how it would stare at corners of every room." "I've heard of dogs doing that," I mentioned. "Yeah, I think most people have. This guy would just sit there, looking where the walls met and growl. Low, quiet growling. Sometimes he would do it for hours. My grandpa thought he was going blind or senile. Then one day in the middle of summer, the dog gets up from staring in the corner and walks outside the house, straight through the yard and into the pond that they had for the cattle." Miguel paused, glancing toward the windows, where we could still see the shapes of dogs. "It just walked in. It didn't swim or struggle. It walked until the water was over its head, and it never came back up. My grandpa watched the whole thing, said it was like the dog had just decided it was done." "Jesus," Carl muttered. "That's messed up," Tammy said. I added, "Well, I've never heard of dogs doing that." I didn't have any of my own personal dog weirdness stories. We'd had normal dogs growing up. But sitting there, surrounded by those silent, staring animals, I was starting to think maybe all dogs knew something we didn't, especially these ones outside the restaurant. At around 11:30, Carl tried to make another break for it. Not out the front. He wasn't that stupid. He thought maybe he could get to his car if he went through the back, where we took out the trash. There were fewer dogs back there that we could tell. He made it about halfway to the dumpster before they converged on him. That same silent rush like before. He barely made it back inside. Barely escaped any bites. "All right, we're staying put," he said, breathing hard. "We've got to wait them out." I guess he was the last one to figure that out, because we all already knew that. We talked about other things, distracting ourselves. Talked about recent movies we'd seen, and people from school. Anything but the dogs. Every once in a while, one of us would peek out at them. They never moved except to sometimes shift positions or scratch themselves, but they didn't stop watching the building. Around 12:30, Tammy noticed something. "Hey, they're not looking at us anymore." We went over to the windows. The dogs, while they were still facing the same way, were now looking east toward the highway. Their heads were tilted up slightly, like they were listening to something we couldn't hear. Even their ears perked up a bit. Then at exactly 1 a.m., I know because I was watching the clock like a hawk, they left, all at once, like someone had called them home. They stood up and trotted off into the darkness. Within 30 seconds, the parking lot was empty. We waited another 10 minutes before Carl unlocked the door. We went out as a group, looking around, ready to run back inside if we had to. But the dogs were gone, really gone, not hiding and not waiting. And the weird thing? The phone started to work again when we got back inside. Carl called his roommate to come get him, take him to the emergency room for the bites, just in case. The rest of us cleaned up and got the heck out of Dodge. We agreed to come in early the next day to finish closing duties. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. Some sort of strange disease? My working theory is that maybe that group of dogs was a pack, and they all got into some fungi-infected food that caused them to freak out or hallucinate. Then again, that could be a reach. What do you think it was? Like, seriously, guys, what the heck do you think happened to me? I'm out of theories. It wasn't the most horrifying story, but it was very, very strange. Something was calling her home. From Sarah M. For some context, my grandmother, who I've always called Nana, is 87 years old. Up until about 2 years ago, she was one of those elderly people who seemed invincible, still driving and still gardening, still making her famous butter tarts for every family gathering. Then she had a series of small strokes. The doctors called them TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. Each one took a little piece of her away. First her words, then her mobility, and finally, it seemed, her connection to the present moment. By last September, she couldn't speak at all. She could make sounds, little hums and sighs, but no words. She could still walk with her walker, but only short distances. Most concerning was how she'd start to fade in and out of awareness. Sometimes she would look right through you, like you weren't there. Other times she'd stare at something none of us could see, usually out the windows, and her face would light up with this strange mix of joy and longing. We all knew that she couldn't stay alone out there at her cabin near Lake Huron. My mom and her siblings had been taking turns staying with Nana at her cabin. It's about 40 minutes outside of Godric, Ontario, tucked back into the woods, but only a 10-minute walk from the lake. She'd lived there alone for 15 years after my grandfather passed, and she refused to leave. "I'll die in this house," she used to say when she could still talk, and she meant it as a promise, not a threat. The plan was to keep her there as long as possible with family support, then transition to in-home care when needed. But in September, my mom had a work crisis. My uncle was dealing with his own health issues, and my aunt was in Europe for her daughter's wedding. That left me. I work remotely as a graphic designer, so theoretically, I could work from anywhere with decent internet. Nana's place had been upgraded with fiber optic the year before, my uncle's doing. So I agreed to stay for 3 weeks until my aunt got back. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The drive up from Toronto was beautiful. Early fall colors just starting to show, that crisp September air that makes you want to buy unnecessary scarves. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood. The exterior was a dark wood, and it had a green metal roof. There was a wraparound porch with the same rocking chairs that had been there for decades. Inside was cozy but not cramped, with 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, kitchen with a window overlooking the backyard and the forest beyond. Nana was having a good day. She smiled when she saw me, reached out to touch my face, and made a happy humming sound. Her eyes were clear and present. I got her settled in her chair by the window with some tea, and she seemed content to watch the birds at the feeder that my mom had set up. The first few days were actually pleasant. I'd work during the day while Nana dozed or looked out the window. I'd make us simple meals. She could still feed herself if you cut everything small enough. In the evenings, we'd sit together, and I would tell her about my day, or read to her from the stack of large print mysteries she had on her bookshelf. She couldn't respond, but sometimes she would pat my hand or make a soft sound that seemed like acknowledgement. It was on the fourth night that things started to feel off. I'd helped Nana to bed around 9 p.m. She slept in the master bedroom on the main floor. I was in the guest room right next door. I stayed up working until about midnight. Then I went to check on her before going to bed myself. She seemed to be sleeping peacefully, so I left her door cracked and went to my room. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to sounds from Nana's room. Not distressed sounds, more like she was having a conversation. I could hear her making her wordless sounds, but they had a rhythm to them, like she was responding to someone. I figured she was dreaming and almost went back to sleep, but then I heard her bed creak like she was trying to get up. I quickly went to go check on her. When I opened her door fully, she was sitting up in bed, facing the window. The curtains were open. I was sure I'd closed them earlier, and she was reaching toward the glass, making these soft and eager sounds. Her hands were opening and closing like she was trying to grasp something. "Nana?" I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "It's okay. It's just nighttime. Let's lie back down now." She didn't acknowledge me at all. She kept reaching toward that dark window. I walked around the bed to see what she might be looking at, but there was nothing there. Just the backyard and the black wall of trees beyond. No lights and no animals that I could see. I gently guided her back down to lying position, and she let me, but her eyes stayed fixed on that window the whole time. I closed the curtains firmly and sat with her until she fell back to sleep, which took about 20 minutes. The whole time she kept making these little whimpering sounds, like a dog that desperately wanted to go outside. The next morning, she seemed fine. She ate her breakfast, even smiled at a cardinal that landed on the porch railing. I convinced myself it had just been a weird dream state she was in, maybe a side effect of one of her medications. But it happened again 2 nights later, and this time it was stranger. Same time, around 2 a.m., I woke up because I heard the front door. Not opening, but like someone was testing the handle. There was this soft rattling sound and then nothing. Then again, it came. I grabbed my phone and crept to the living room, my heart pounding. The door was still locked, deadbolt in place. I peered out the peephole but saw nothing. The motion light my uncle had installed was not on. Then I heard Nana, those same conversational sounds but more urgent. I found her not in bed, but standing at her window, palms pressed against the glass. She had managed to open the curtains again. Her walker was still by the bed. She'd walked to the window without it, something she hadn't been able to do in months. "Nana, how did you—" I started, but then I saw her reflection in the window. She was smiling. It wasn't her usual gentle smile, but something almost ecstatic, much wider, and her eyes were tracking something, moving left to right. It was as if she was watching something pacing back and forth outside. I looked out the window over her shoulder. I didn't see anything, it was just dark. But then, and I swear this happened, I saw movement at the tree line. Just a shape, darker than the dark around it, swaying slightly. It could have been branches moving in the wind, except there was no wind at the time. The trees were perfectly still. Nana made a sound I'd never heard from her before. It sounded like a laugh, but with a hollow tone to it. She raised one hand and waved, a slow wave, like you would give someone you knew well. Then the shadow at the tree line moved. Have you ever seen time-lapsed footage of a shadow moving across the ground as the sun moves? Smooth and inevitable. Well, that's how that thing moved out there. It seemed to glide backward deeper into the trees until I could not distinguish it from the regular darkness anymore. I got Nana back to bed, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with every light on, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Forest animals, trick of the light, exhaustion from caregiving, all reasonable explanations. The next incident happened 5 days later, and it was different. It was worse. I'd started sleeping on the couch in Nana's room, worried about her nighttime wandering. She had only wandered again in the last few nights, just standing and looking out the window that time. Nothing else crazy. But on this particularly dark night, when there was a new moon out and the sky was overcast, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face, I woke to the sound of Nana crying. It didn't sound sad. It was more like a frustrated cry, like a kid who can't reach something that they must desperately want. She was in bed, but sitting up again, and this time she wasn't looking at the window. She was looking at the corner of the room, the one furthest from the door. I turned on the bedside lamp. The corner was empty, of course, but Nana kept staring at it, tears streaming down her face, making these heartbreaking, reaching gestures. "What is it, Nana? What do you see?" She turned to look at me then, and for a moment, her face was perfectly clear, perfectly present and aware, like her strokes had never occurred. She opened her mouth, and I swear she was about to speak. Then her eyes went wide with what looked like fear, and she grabbed me by the wrist hard, harder than someone her age and condition should have been able to. She pulled me close and made a sound that was almost a word. It sounded like no, or maybe go. I couldn't tell which. Then she looked back at the corner, and her grip loosened. Her face went slack again, back to that absent expression she wore most days. I stayed awake with her until dawn. Around 4 a.m., I started to feel it too. A sensation like I was being watched. Not from the corner where Nana had been looking, but from everywhere. Like the darkness itself had eyes. I know how that sounds, I know, but I felt it. The final incident happened 3 nights before my aunt was due back. I was exhausted by this point, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep a night, and I was getting jumpy at every sound. I was beginning to leave lights on all night, which seemed to help keep Nana in bed, though she would still sometimes sit up, staring at that corner or the window. This night I woke not to sounds from Nana, but to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No house sounds, no outside sounds, nothing. It was like the world had been muted. I sat up on the couch and looked over at Nana's bed. It was empty. I jumped up and I turned on every light I could reach, lights that I thought I'd left on. "Nana?" No answer. Her walker was still there. Her slippers were still by the bed, but the bedroom door was open. I ran to the living room. The front door was open too, not forced or broken, but standing wide open, letting in the cold night air. I grabbed a flashlight and I ran outside, barefoot, calling for Nana. The motion light was on, but I could see it had not been triggered by Nana. She was nowhere in its range. I swept the flashlight across the yard, and that's when I found her. She was at the edge of the forest, standing perfectly still in her white nightgown. No walker, no shoes, just standing there like she was waiting for something. Or someone. I ran to her, the grass cold and wet under my feet. "Nana! Oh my God, you're freezing!" She was ice cold to the touch, but she didn't seem to notice. She was staring into the woods with that same ecstatic expression I'd seen before. And then I heard it. From deep in the woods came a sound that I can only describe as a call. Somehow it didn't sound like it came from an animal or a person. It was musical almost, rising and falling like a lullaby, but wrong. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I could not leave Nana there. And then she took a step into the forest. "No!" I grabbed her arm, and she turned to look at me. Her expression was disappointed, like I was keeping her from something wonderful. She made a sad little sound and looked back at the trees. The calling got louder, closer, and I swear I could almost understand it, like it was just on the edge of being words. It sounded old and patient and somehow hungry all at once. Nana took another step. She was surprisingly strong, pulling against my grip. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, and then I felt it. That sensation like something was pulling at her too. Something I could not see. I was filled with emotion then, and I shouted into the darkness what made most sense to me at the time. "She's not ready! She's not ready! Leave her alone!" Then the music-like calling stopped, just cut off mid-note. The normal night sounds rushed back in, the crickets and wind in the leaves, a distant owl. Nana went limp in my arms, and I had to support her full weight. I half carried, half dragged her back to the house, locked every door and window, and sat with her in the living room with every light blazing until the sun came up. She slept for almost 20 hours after that. When she finally woke up, she seemed different. Calmer maybe, or maybe just more resigned. She didn't try to get up at night anymore, didn't stare at corners or windows. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with this expression that I could not place. Perhaps it was accusatory. Perhaps it was something else. It felt like regret and a secret we now both shared. My aunt came back 2 days after that, and I've never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. I told her Nana had been having some confusion at night, maybe needed more care than we could provide. I didn't tell her about the rest. Was I wrong for that? We arranged for hospice care to start the next week. Professional caregivers who could be there 24/7. Nana seemed to accept it without protest. Not that she could protest verbally, but she didn't seem upset. The day I left, she held my hand for a long time, squeezed it 3 times, our old signal for "I love you" from when I was a kid. Then she looked toward the window and made a gesture I understood perfectly. She was saying, "Soon." That was about 2 months ago. Nana is still kicking, still in the cabin with round-the-clock care. My mom says she's peaceful at the moment, sleeping most of the time. The caregivers haven't reported anything unusual. I don't know what it was out there that wanted my grandmother. I don't know if it was trying to take her or welcome her, or something else entirely. I feel as though there are old things in those forests that we don't understand. Things that have been there a lot longer than our cabins and roads, maybe even longer than the lake itself. The Student Who Drew Things Before They Happened. From Miss K. I want to be clear up front. I've taught hundreds of kids. I've had students with behavioral issues, emotional disturbances, learning disabilities, spectrum disorders, trauma backgrounds, you name it. I've been bitten, kicked, screamed at, and threatened with scissors. None of that prepared me for Michael. That's not his real name, and for legal reasons I've got to change the names up here and be a bit vague about certain things. I've been teaching 3rd grade for about 11 years, and this is a story about the most disturbing thing that happened to me. One fall, Michael transferred to our school. That's already a tough time to start. Kids have already formed their friend groups, and we're deep into the curriculum. Routines are established. But Michael wasn't interested in making friends anyway. His previous school records were surprisingly thin. Some notes about him being quiet and gifted in art. His academics were fine, nothing that would raise any red flags. He was small for 8 years old, thin too, with this white blonde hair that was always perfectly combed. His mother dressed him in these formal clothes, button-up shirts and dress pants and leather shoes. The other kids wore jeans and sneakers, so he stuck out immediately. But it wasn't the clothes that made him unsettling. It was the staring at first. Michael would pick another student and just watch them. This wasn't your typical glance or people watching that kids often do. He would turn his entire body to face them and stare without blinking for uncomfortable amounts of time. When I would redirect him, like, "Michael, eyes on your paper, please," he'd comply right away, almost too quickly, like a switch being flipped. The first real incident happened about 2 weeks after he arrived. We were doing free drawing time while I worked with a small reading group. I noticed Michael was drawing very intently, hunched over his paper so no one could see it. This wasn't odd. Kids can be very protective or insecure about their art. But Sophia, who sat next to him, suddenly gasped. "Miss K, look what Michael drew." I walked over. Michael didn't try to hide the picture. He sat back and looked up at me with this blank expression. The drawing was, well, technically very good for a 3rd grader. Too good, actually. It showed a bird, drawn in careful detail with colored pencils. The bird was on its back, wings spread, clearly dead. There were even little X's for eyes, which seemed like something he'd seen in a cartoon, except the rest of the drawing wasn't cartoonish at all. It was dreadfully realistic. There were ants drawn around it, and he'd added flies with little motion lines around them. "Wow, that's very detailed, Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "But let's draw something happier for free time, okay? How about a picture of what you want to do this weekend?" He nodded and started a new drawing without any argument. But Sophia kept staring at the dead bird picture on his desk. About 10 minutes later, we heard a thud against the classroom window. A sparrow had flown into it. This does happen on occasion. The janitor explained to me once that the birds can't see the glass when the light hits it certain ways. The kids rushed to the window to look at it, and there it was on the ground outside, on its back, wings spread. Michael didn't get up to look, though. He kept drawing his new picture. A house with a tree, perfectly normal, like nothing happened. After school, I went outside to check on the bird, thinking maybe it was just stunned. It was dead. And yes, there were ants already starting to investigate it. But ants are everywhere outside. It was fall, they were probably getting ready for winter. It was a coincidence, it had to be. The second incident was in November, right before Thanksgiving break. Michael had started this habit of giving drawings to other students. They weren't gifts or friendship offerings. He would walk up to someone's desk and place a drawing there and walk away without saying a word. The other kids found it creepy, and I had to agree. But there was nothing explicitly wrong with giving classmates pictures. Until Brody got one. Brody was one of my louder students, always moving and always talking. A good kid, he just needed reminders about volume and keeping his hands to himself. Michael gave Brody a drawing of a boy lying in a bed with his leg in a cast. The boy had brown hair, like Brody, wore a red shirt, like Brody often did. Above the bed, Michael had drawn a calendar with a date circled, November 28th. Brody laughed about it. "Why'd you draw me with a broken leg, weirdo?" Without a word, Michael went back to his seat. I took the drawing and told Michael that we don't draw pictures of classmates getting hurt. He nodded and simply said, "Okay, Miss K," in that flat voice he had, and that was that. After Thanksgiving, Brody came back to school on the 27th, bouncing off the walls about his family's trip to his cousin's house, and how he ate 3 pieces of pie and how his uncle let him ride the ATV. The next morning, Brody's mom called. Brody had fallen off his bike that morning, rushing to get to school. He broke his tibia. He'd be out for at least a week. I still have that drawing in my desk. I probably should have thrown it away, but I kept it in my desk drawer. I told myself I would document concerning behavior, but really I think I kept it because I needed proof that it had happened, that I hadn't just imagined the date on the picture wrong, the cast, or the other details. After that, the other kids began to avoid Michael completely. 3rd graders aren't subtle. They would actively move away whenever he came near, refusing to partner with him for projects. I had to constantly manage the situation. I couldn't punish them for being scared because honestly, I was a little creeped out too. Could I really just tell them, "You have to be nice to the boy who draws your injuries before they happen"? I brought my concerns to the principal, showing her the drawings I'd kept. She said we couldn't do anything based on coincidences and children's imagination. She suggested I refer Michael to the school counselor for social skills support. I did. The counselor said Michael was polite, answered questions appropriately, showed no signs of abuse or neglect. If anything, he was quirky and bright. In January, Michael started drawing during class, not just doodling like kids do when they're bored. This was intense, focused drawing sessions while I was trying to teach. I would take his paper away, but he'd pull out another one. I'd remove all the paper from his desk, and he would act like he was drawing on the desk itself with his finger, tracing lines only he could see. The guidance counselor suggested giving him a special notebook for his drawings, letting him use it as a coping mechanism as long as he was still listening. So I did. Big mistake. The drawings were getting worse. Not necessarily violent, but more wrong. He drew our classroom, but empty with all the desks overturned. He drew the playground with no kids, just empty swings moving by themselves. He showed movement with these little lines that made them look like they were swinging violently. He drew faces, but would leave out the features, just blank skin where eyes or mouths should be. Then in February, he drew a picture that made me call his mother immediately. It was a woman in a car, but the car was upside down. The woman had long dark hair like our principal, Mrs. Patterson. She was still in the car, suspended by her seatbelt, and Michael had used red crayon liberally. His mother came in for a conference. She was a thin and nervous woman who barely made eye contact. When I showed her the drawing, she went pale. "He's always been an artistic one," she said quietly. "His father is too before he left. Michael just sees things differently." "This is a drawing of our principal in a car accident," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "I'm concerned about the violent imagery he's prone to drawing." "He doesn't mean anything by it," she said, but she was folding and unfolding her hands in her lap. "He just draws what comes into his head. His therapist says it's expression." He was in therapy. Okay, that was something at least, but when I asked if she could share any strategies from his therapist that might help in the classroom, She shook her head and mumbled something about privacy. 2 days later, Mrs. Patterson was in a car accident. Black ice on her way to school. Her car skidded off the road and flipped. She was okay, thankfully. Bruised and shaken up bad, but okay. She was out for a week after that. When she came back, I showed her Michael's drawing. She stared at it for a long time. When did he draw this? 2 days before your accident. She kept the drawing. I kid you not, the next day we had a substitute principal for the foreseeable future, while Mrs. Patterson took a personal leave of absence. She didn't come back. Michael knew she was gone before anyone announced it. I found him at her office door that morning, standing there, staring at the dark window. "She's not gonna come back," he said. Not a question. "We have Mr. Romano now. He's the substitute principal," I said. "She saw the drawing, and she didn't like it, but it was true." That was the most he'd ever spoken to me at once. I didn't really know what to say. In March was the last incident of note. Michael had been drawing all morning, filling pages and pages in his notebook. He wasn't even pretending to pay attention anymore. Around 11 a.m., just before lunch, he stood up and walked over to my desk. He placed a drawing in front of me. It was me, in my classroom. Apparently it was after hours. The clock read 5:17. I was at my desk grading papers, which I often did after school. But in the drawing, I was not alone. Behind me, also drawn in careful detail, was a figure. It was impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the ceiling. It had long arms that ended in too many fingers, and its face wasn't blank exactly, but disturbing to say the least. The features were arranged in a way that suggested a face without actually being one, if that makes sense. The thing that made my blood run cold wasn't this creature. It was that Michael had drawn me turning around to look at it. My face in the drawing was screaming. "When?" is all I could ask. "Today," Michael said, "after school." I stared at him. "Michael, are you threatening me?" "No," he said, tilting his head like I'd asked something silly. "It's just what happens. Unless you leave before then. You should leave before then." I reported it immediately, went straight to the principal's office and called the school resource officer. Called his mother too. There was a big meeting. Michael sat through it all, completely calm, occasionally drawing on a paper his mother had given him. The school resource officer looked at all the drawings, the ones I'd documented, the ones I'd kept. He said there was nothing really threatening about them, nothing that indicated violence against others. Creepy, yeah, but not actionable. His mother, however, was rattled, more rattled than I'd ever seen her. She kept looking at the drawing of me and the thing behind me, and her hands were trembling. "We'll transfer," she said suddenly. "We'll transfer to Madison Elementary, today, right now." "Well, that seems extreme," the substitute principal started. "No," she interrupted. "We're leaving. Now." She grabbed Michael's hand and pulled him up. "Get your things from your cubby." Michael looked back at me as his mother dragged him out. The last thing he ever said to me, as he was being pulled away, was, "Remember, leave before then." Just like that, they were gone. His mother withdrew him that afternoon, and I never saw him again. I took his advice. I didn't stay after school that day. I left at 3:30 with everyone else, went home, and called in sick the next day for good measure. I stayed in my apartment, trying to decide if I was having a nervous breakdown. When I came back to school, I cleaned out my classroom. I found more of Michael's drawings stuffed in his desk. Things I hadn't seen before. There were pictures of a house fire, a dog lying still in a yard, a room full of people all looking at something outside the frame, but their faces were terrified. I threw them away. Every last one. If these were true events, then they were things that we weren't supposed to know or see yet. People simply aren't supposed to know what's about to happen. Even the bad things. Things went back to normal now that Michael was gone. Even so, I could never bring myself to stay for any reason past 5 p.m. No exceptions. Not to grade papers, not for evening events. The other teachers think I've gotten a better work-life balance going on. The principal praised me for setting boundaries. They don't know the real reason. That I sometimes still dream about that drawing. About one day turning around to see whatever Michael drew behind me. Sometimes I wonder where Michael is now, and what he's drawing, who he's warning. That is, if warning is even the right word. The 3-second rule. From Jake. Working as a backcountry ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park has been a dream job. My dad would have been proud. He passed in 2018, but he's the reason I'm out here. Growing up, that man dragged me through every holler and ridge in East Tennessee, teaching me to track deer and read weather patterns. He even taught me to identify edible plants. He wasn't gentle about it either. 4 a.m. wake-ups in November to sit in a deer stand. 12-mile hikes with a full pack when I was barely 10. Making me gut my own fish even when I was crying about how gross it was. Nature doesn't care if you're comfortable, he'd say. You either respect it, or it'll teach you to. At the time, I hated those trips. Now I get paid to basically live them every day. Minus the part where he'd make me eat cold Vienna sausages for breakfast, because that's what real outdoorsmen do. I'm stationed mostly in the backcountry areas, checking permits and maintaining trails and doing search and rescue on the odd times that we actually need to. What I'm about to tell you happened in 2019. I'm sharing it now because I found this podcast, and I think it's been enough time. The reports of these strange incidents have stopped now, so maybe it's safe. It began in late April that year. I was at the Molly's Ridge shelter doing a routine check when I met a pair of thru-hikers, a couple in their 30s. They were pretty experienced from the look of their gear. They seemed kind of rattled up. The woman kept looking over her shoulder while the man talked to me. Hey, Ranger, weird question. You ever get reports of, I don't know how to say this without sounding nuts, but someone living off trail around here? Like, way off trail? Yeah, actually, occasionally, I said. Usually just hikers who got turned around. Why? The woman spoke up then. We saw someone yesterday evening, about a mile back, near that creek crossing with the big downed oak. I knew the spot, a very pretty area. She continued. The lady was just standing there. In the woods maybe 30 feet off the trail. I thought it was another hiker, but she was wearing this old dress, like really, really old and dark colored, down to her ankles. Could have been a historical reenactor of some sort, I suggested. We do get those sometimes, people doing old-timey photography. The man shook his head. That's what we thought, but then we stopped to look around, and then she started to stare at us. She didn't move and didn't wave, nothing, just stared. And her face. What about her face? I asked. They exchanged glances. It was hard to see through the trees and shadows, the woman said carefully. But something was wrong with her face. Maybe she was too pale, or something else. I don't know. Well, we kept on walking after that, the man added. But I looked back after a few seconds, and she had moved, like covered 20 feet without making a sound, still just standing there like she was before, and staring. That's when we decided to book it. I took down their information, making some notes. and I told them it was probably just someone camping illegally who did not want to be interacted with or found. But then I got 3 more similar reports over the next 2 weeks. Reports describing a woman in an old dark dress, and she would be standing perfectly still off trail and staring. The report that really got my attention came from a scout leader with a group of boys camping near Spence Field. A real level-headed guy, ex-military too. "I know how this sounds," he told me, "but I've been bringing troops out here for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this." He said one of his boys spotted her first, standing between trees about 50 yards from their campsite. When the scout leader looked, she was definitely there. A tall woman with a darker dress, absolutely motionless. He tried calling out to her, asking if she needed help, but he got no response. "I started walking toward her," he said. "Got maybe 10 feet before I stopped. Something felt really bad about the situation, really wrong, like every instinct I had was telling me not to get any closer. Sounds crazy, right?" "What did she do?" "Nothing, just stared. But one of my boys, he was counting. Kids count everything, sometimes it's a nervous habit. He goes, 'Mr. Davidson, she's been staring for 3 seconds.' Right as he says 3, she smiles at me, and it's no normal smile. Then she took 1 step backward and was just gone. I blinked, I swear, and she was just not there anymore." The weird part was what happened next. The kid who had counted had 3 separate incidents that night and the next day, claiming something grabbed his tent and shook it violently at 2 a.m., but no one saw anything. The second time, he swore he saw the woman standing at the edge of the camp at dawn, but when others looked, they found nothing. And the third time, on the hike, a branch broke directly above him. Would have knocked him out cold if the scoutmaster hadn't yanked him out of the way. After these 3 incidents, nothing else happened to the kid, but he was done with camping after that. By the middle of May, I'd collected about a dozen similar reports. The stories were spreading among hikers. People were calling her the counting witch. The rule, according to trail gossip, was simple. If she stares at you and you're still there, not even trying to walk away after 3 seconds, you're marked. 3 scares in 24 hours. Some said if you didn't leave the forest after the 3rd scare, you might just disappear entirely. I thought it was bullcrap. Mass hysteria, a viral rumor, someone playing an elaborate prank. But I started to pay attention during my backcountry rounds, looking for signs of illegal camping, costume pieces, anything that might explain it. Towards the end of May, I was hiking the stretch between Molly's Ridge and Russell Field, checking for some storm damage from the previous week. It was late afternoon. I was about 2 miles from Russell Field when I felt like I was being watched. I've spent enough time in the woods to know when something is off out there. You always hear about things going eerily quiet, and that's kind of true sometimes. You gotta remember, the forest critters out there with you, they get scared too, and their reaction is usually to run away or hide. At the time, all I could hear were my footsteps and breathing. At a certain point, I stopped, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. I scanned the tree line, and then I saw her, about 40 feet off trail, standing between 2 massive hemlocks with a dark dress like everyone always described. She had long black hair that didn't move, despite the breeze I could feel on my face, and of course, she was staring right at me. My first idea was to call out to her and do my ranger thing, but the words died right in my throat. There was something profoundly wrong about how still she was. People don't stand like that, even trying to stay completely motionless. Humans make micro movements, but she did not. Her face is hard to describe. Human-like, but not entirely human. At least, not anymore. Imagine an alien artist trying to draw what a person might look like. Her eyes were too far apart and her mouth was a bit too wide, with skin that looked more like candle wax. I should have walked away right then and right there. That's what any rational person would have done. But I had to know what this was. I stood my ground, and I stared back. 1 second, her lips started to curve upward. 2 seconds, the smile spread wider than should be possible. 3 seconds, she tilted her head at an angle that made my stomach want to empty all its contents onto the ground. She then stepped backward and was gone. Not walking away, but gone, just like that man had described. I stood there for probably another minute. I rubbed my eyes, blinked multiple times. Did I see that right? I wondered. She wasn't anywhere to be found. After a moment, I continued on to Russell Field, but I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. That night, I was in the Russell Field shelter, updating my logbook, when the first incident happened. I heard something moving around outside. Something big. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The beam caught something at the edge of the clearing. The woman again. Perfectly still like before, but this time she was closer. At most 20 feet. I blinked and she was gone. But the grass where she had been standing was pressed down in 2 perfect footprints. I didn't sleep. I was a bit too creeped out to do that. I sat up with my back against the shelter wall and kept my flashlight close, and I watched the dark. Nothing else happened that night. The second incident came the next afternoon. I was heading back towards Cades Cove, making good time too, when I began to hear branches snapping above me. I looked up just in time to see a massive dead limb falling directly toward me. I dove sideways, and it crashed down right where I'd been standing. It was a big branch, would have killed me or at least broken a lot of bones. When I looked at where it had broken off, the break was clean, too clean, more like someone with a chainsaw had sliced through it. I picked up my pace after that. I had maybe 6 hours left in the 24-hour window of the alleged curse. Just had to make it through one more incident, right? It came at sunset. I was almost to the Cades Cove Road, could actually see my truck in the distance, when the trail just ended. I mean, I knew that trail like my own backyard. I've hiked it hundreds of times, but suddenly I was facing a wall of rhododendron so thick I couldn't see through it. I turned around to backtrack and I froze. She was standing right behind me, close enough that I could smell her disgusting hair, like wet and rotting earth. Her face was inches from me, with that too wide smile spreading across her features that kept shifting slightly, like every centimeter of her face could not decide where it wanted to be. 3, she whispered. Her voice sounded like wind through a hollow log. Then she was gone, and the trail was normal again. My truck was still visible ahead. I ran the rest of the way. I didn't stop until I was inside, with the doors locked. That was it. 3 incidents in 24 hours, just like the stories said. I expected more reports after this incident, but they didn't happen. They seemed to just stop completely. Not a single sighting for the rest of that summer or fall or the next year. And now the Counting Witch has just become another piece of trail folklore, mostly forgotten. I mean, if you're an avid hiker listening to or reading this, you've probably never heard of it. So I'm glad to say that people just don't see her anymore. My dad always told me nature demands respect, and he usually meant practical things like weather, wildlife, terrain, but I think I'm adding something else to that list, and that's the paranormal, I guess. Things that aren't supposed to be real, but are. If you're a 90s kid like me, maybe you heard that rumor that McDonald's beef was actually horse meat or even kangaroo meat. But here's my theory. What if it's dog meat, and all those dogs were out for revenge? Just kidding, don't sue me, Ronald, I heard you're back. Your meat is just fine. Don't take that out of context. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to help us reach as many new fans as possible. And send us your scary work-related stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Before you go, check out my new show, an adult comedy paranormal podcast called Night Watchers, where you can hear my voice and some of the crew from Oni Plays discussing the supernatural and taking quote-unquote real calls from people with paranormal problems. That's Night Watchers, available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Thank you, and I'll see you again real soon.